Hello, Faithful Politics listeners and watchers. If you're joining us on YouTube, this is Josh Bertram. I'm your faithful host here on Faithful Politics, your ever political host. Will is not going to be able to be with us today, but we have Robyn Whitaker, Dr. Robyn Whitaker. Is it doctor in Australia?
Yes.
Or is it like, okay.
Yeah,
I didn't know if I had to call you like maestro or like madame or...
Call me what you like, but doctor is traditional. Yeah, that's how we roll.
Doctor's traditional, very cool.
Yeah.
This is Robyn Whitaker, who is joining us at let's see here, 11:42 Australian time.
It's getting late. Yeah,
it's getting late. So
quarter to midnight almost. Yeah.
We're keeping your dogs up, and I apologize.
Yeah. No, it's great to be with you, Josh. Yeah.
Thank you. And it's almost 10 a.m. here, so it's a crazy time difference. But Robyn, you are a biblical scholar and historian. You have a particular interest in contemporary use and misuse of the Bible, particularly in debates about sexuality, gender, and ethics. You are have research expertise in New Testament, late Christian apocalyptic literature, and apocalypticism, gospels, biblical rhetoric, and the visual culture of Greco-Roman world. So I'm super excited. You are working at which seminary? Pilgrim Theological College?
That's right. So this is a Protestant seminary of the Uniting Church in Australia, which for American listeners is a... here in Australia, the Methodists, the Presbyterians, and the Congregationalists all combined and formed the Uniting Church about 45 years ago. So we're out of those traditions. Yeah, that's where you can...
Very cool. So the Pentecostal tradition I grew up in, you guys are like, those guys are crazy, they're weird, that's all Hillsong, it's all like, they're giving everyone a bad name and all that stuff. I mean, what... is that how the sentiment is?
There's a little bit of that goes on. Although because one of my passions is the Book of Revelation, I find I get Pentecostal students who come and do PhDs with me on the Book of Revelation. So
that's great.
I have a soft spot for the Pentecostal movement. But
good. I'm glad you have a soft spot for the Pentecostals. That's good. I have a soft spot for the Presbyterians and the Methodists because I was very influenced by Presbyterian theology, Reformed theology in seminary, and then in my early career, and then especially like Tim Keller. A guy like Tim Keller really influenced me. Unfortunately, some guys that I'd rather not say influenced me, I'll leave them unnamed.
Yes.
But at the time, they influenced me, and it was good. So,
no, that's right. And well, we're in this weird space culturally, right, where people get written off if they do certain things, but it doesn't mean that they can't also have taught you something along the way. So that's
of course, the
world we're in.
And I got to say, so of course, we're going to talk about your book. That's what we're on here today, to talk about that. And the devil quotes scripture, which I love. I thought that was a great title.
Thank you.
But I got to ask a couple things. First, kind of want to get to know you a little bit, but before that, so again, I saw this Hillsong thing. Have you watched that documentary?
So I have not watched the, bizarrely, the actual Hillsong documentary has launched in America and it is not available in Australia yet.
What?
So we've had our own local documentaries, but the big Hillsong documentary, despite the fact Hillsong's Australian, right?
Yes.
It's not here yet. But I have been watching the Shiny Happy People Duggar one. Have you been watching that?
Yes, I did watch that.
Yeah, so I'm tracking all of this. I'm waiting for the Hillsong one to arrive.
You're waiting for... I wonder why they did that.
What did you think of it?
Put it... Oh, my goodness.
It's probably too much to talk about. Yeah.
Yeah, I know. We can talk about anything on this podcast. It's more like what you want to talk about. I'm good. Like, there's nothing really off limits. But, I was brokenhearted, man, honestly. I was like, this is just gives such a bad name to Christians. And I was just brokenhearted because at the bottom of it, I think, is a lot of people that are scared and they're trying to keep their power or position or whatever it is. And because they're afraid. They don't want to lose it. They don't want to lose what they have. And so I think we go into self-preservation mode. And
I think so. I think we see in so many of these mega church kind of implosions we've seen, right? It's power.
Yes.
Power is a deep problem, and people protecting their power. And unfortunately, there's, you know, faithful Christians sitting in the pews who get hurt by that.
Yes, they get very, very hurt by it. And it's, you know, I think that it's a wake-up call for pastors. I think if it's a wake-up call for Christians, like, hey, dude, don't put your faith in these charismatic people. Like, listen to their preaching, love their preaching, you know, but, like, these people, I mean, I don't know. They failed us so much, and now that we have so much access to always seeing what people are doing, and always seeing what's happening, and always having access to all this stuff, like that we know what's going on in Australia, which we never would have known, you know,
I know,
whatever,
right?
like years and years and years and years and years ago. So it's just this, I think that we have access to a lot of information in people's lives that we never did before, and so things come out.
They do. You can't hide, or you can't hide for long, right?
Yes, it'll eventually, you know, something of that magnitude. You can't keep it on, and you shouldn't be able to, right? So
no, you shouldn't. Yeah, that's.
It's just wild, man. But it kind of moves into the book, because it's interesting because so much of the Bible is about the use of power. It has been used for many, many, many different ways. And the only reason it can't be used in different ways is because someone has interpreted it that way.
Exactly.
And figured out a way to convince themselves or others that that's what it says. So you have talked about this in your new book, Even the Devil Quotes Scripture. So we want to get into that. But tell us a little bit about yourself, what brought you to this point, and why did you write a book about the devil in Scripture?
I mean, it's not really about the devil, but no, I grew up in the kind of Methodist tradition, and but in my teenage years was really influenced by conservative evangelical kind of circles. So I went to a big one of the first sort of big mega Baptist churches here in Melbourne, Australia, and became quite involved with very conservative parts of Christianity. And so when I went off to seminary, I had this experience of call by God. And when I went off to seminary, I was pretty much a fundamentalist. I mean, I had this disconnect. And I talk about this in the book, between experience and what I believed, because I would have told you I didn't think women should be ordained. I was in that, you know, camp. That's what I've been taught. And then I had this experience of God saying, go to seminary, I want you to be a minister. And I'm like, ooh, okay. Do I need to rethink some things about the way I'm reading the Bible?
That's weird.
And so that led me on this journey of really deconstructing a whole lot of stuff I thought about how I read the Bible. And so in some ways, you know, fast forward 25 years, in some ways I wrote this book kind of for my younger self and for the people I keep meeting who are that. So there's a connection here to the Hillsong conversation. When I go speak in church conferences, often with young adults, I keep meeting people who have left those very conservative spaces, often over gender and sexuality issues. They've often found more liberal and affirming churches to be part of, but they still have this very high regard for Scripture. They want to know how to read the Bible. They want to know how to make sense of their own experience with the Bible. But there's often a disconnect between, they've kind of been taught to read it in a fundamentalist way, and yet they go to these more liberal spaces that often don't read it that way. And so in some ways I wrote the book for those people. It's kind of a deconstructing some of the fundamentalism, but I also wanted to do something that was reconstructing, that said, well, how can we read this book? How can we recognize its authority in the Christian tradition? And how can we read it faithfully for what it is, and also ethically for today? Because we know the Bible can be used to hurt and harm and clobber people, right? Literally and figuratively. So that's a brief snapshot of my journey. I can talk more about any of it.
I love it. Absolutely. So the book itself, how is it structured? How are you trying to like bring people through the flow to get them to where you want them to go?
Great question. I started out really wanting to talk about how do we interpret the Bible, because every time we read, we interpret, right? Even to just read aloud in church or a Bible study, the voice you use, the emotion you use, this is an act of interpretation. So I started out setting out to write a book about how we do that. And I realized we can't talk about how we interpret the Bible until we really talk about what it is. Because what you think the Bible is going to deeply shape what you expect when you open it and how you approach it. So if you think it's a rule book, you come looking for rules for life. If you think it's just a very human story, you treat it differently. If you think it's God's words beamed directly into human ears and hands, you have certain expectations about how it works. So in terms of the shape of the book, I spend probably the first half kind of talking about what the Bible is and what it is not. So kind of dismantling some of the misconceptions. I take on infallibility and inerrancy and some of these buzzwords and say these are not in the Bible itself. This is not how the Bible talks about itself. So I'm trying to kind of really uncover, how does the Bible actually talk about itself, and how does the Bible itself show us what it does and how it works? And then the second part of the book is moving more towards that hermeneutical question, the how do we interpret it? And what I argue is that the ethic we consistently see in the New Testament, quoted everywhere by Jesus and Paul and in almost every single New Testament book, is the Leviticus 19:18, love your neighbor as yourself. And I sort of posed the question, what would it look like if we interpreted the Bible asking two really basic questions? How can my interpretation help me love God more? And really importantly for today's world, how can it help me love my neighbor more? And I argue that if the way we interpret scripture does not lead to more love, we've really got to go back and think again, because that is antithetical to the kind of grounding ethic we find in the New Testament. So that's where I land.
Man, that's powerful. That's powerful. And so let me take an example. Like, let's say, okay, so you mentioned a lot of the students that come and talk to you, they've had issues with the church because of its stance on gender and sexuality. Let's dig into that a little bit, because obviously that's like the big thing that, one of the major issues that the church is facing today.
Yeah.
So you mentioned the Bible's been used to clobber. Totally agree. It has been, and it's very unfortunate. I think it's just the way that it's because of the human element of everything, right?
Yeah.
So my question is, like, how do we let's tackle something like homosexuality, right? In the scriptures.
You've gone straight to the hot issue.
You have to, right?
Yeah,
you have to, right?
Yeah.
So what? Like, let's talk about it for, like, let's say conservative Christians that are like really, really like concerned they're being like tricked, or someone's trying to tell them that they've been interpreting the Bible wrong their whole lives, or whatever it is. How should they go about interpreting the scriptures that they're finding that are, like, they want to have an ethic of love, but then they have scriptures that talk about abominations and the Old Testament, things like that. So what, kind of walk through the process for someone who's trying to interpret with love?
Yes. Let's unpack this slowly. So
as much as you need to.
So I'm not going to necessarily go nitty gritty into the specific verses, because that's just a rabbit hole.
Fine.
But it is about the overall ethic and approach, as you say. So one of the things I would point to is that the Bible itself, and I talk about this in the book, models for us the need to reinterpret for new contexts. So, for example, when in Nehemiah and Ezra, in the Old Testament books of Nehemiah, when the people come back from exile, so there's been a couple of generations of Jews over in Babylon, they come back to their homeland, and the people all gather in the town square. This is in Nehemiah 8. And there's priests and there's lay leaders, and they open the book of the law, which is what we would call the Pentateuch, or the first 5 books, but that is their Bible at this time. And the text tells us they read this, and it's read with interpretation. And so right there on the pages of the Bible, we have this acknowledgement that you have to interpret the Bible. And in fact, what they do in the scenes that follow is they reinterpret it. So, earlier in the Bible, there's no problem with something like having a foreign wife. All of a sudden in Nehemiah, the men are told to send their foreign wives home. So we also get a change of ethic. So there are countless examples like that in the Bible where the actual teaching changes depending on the circumstance and the context. So we see this, like marriage is a great example of this. In the Old Testament, you've got be fruitful, multiply, get married, have lots of babies. You get to Paul in the New Testament, and he says it's best to be celibate, right? Not something Christians focus on, because that's not a message we particularly want to hear.
It's not a popular message.
Yeah, it's not a popular preach. You don't get a lot of that preached at, from Hillsong. So Paul's talking about, be celibate, only get married if you really, really have to. That's, and that's because he thinks Jesus is coming back any day. Why would you get married and have babies if Jesus is coming back any day? So the context has changed. It's not that Paul thinks marriage and babies are necessarily wrong. It's just they're no longer the focus or important. So there's heaps of examples in the Bible of that. So if we start to think about something like homosexuality in that context, and with this sort of biblical tradition of reinterpreting biblical teachings, we can start to see that as context shifts and culture shifts, that updating and changing teaching is actually completely modeled for us within the Bible itself. And I would put homosexuality in that kind of basket of stuff. I think we can't rescue the Bible. The Bible does condemn homosexual acts. I don't think it has any understanding of homosexuality as an orientation, right? Right. It's a different worldview. I think
it is.
But like other things we've updated, big one in Christianity was circumcision for men. These were hugely controversial issues at the time. But the teaching changed because of a new context. And I think there's an argument to be made that we actually have models in the Bible of that kind of thing. And I would put attitudes towards homosexuality in that camp. What I say in the book, acknowledging that people are going to disagree with that, right? There's going to be some people who are always going to say it's wrong. What I say in the book is, at the very least, if we have an ethic of love, we won't do harm. So, here in Australia, I've been part of a research group that has actually been mapping the harms of conversion therapy, as it's sometimes called, attempts to change people. And the data is now just saying that that's consistently leading to PTSD type symptoms and higher rates of suicide and those attempts to change and suppress someone's sexuality. And that is harm. That is measurable harm. So at the very least, let's not do that. It's a pretty low bar, but that's a starting place, perhaps, right?
Right.
Yeah.
So that makes, I so many questions and so many thoughts roll in my head when you're talking about that. But one of the things is that the Old Testament, the New Testament's use of the Old, right? So how do we as Christians, an ancient problem, how do we as Christians figure out how to take these texts from the Old Testament, or even the ones from the New, right? Like you said, there's no sense of an orientation. There's no sense of and why would they have that, right? No. Because there was no sense in the world at that time, I'm assuming, of a modern idea of an orientation and all the connotations that has with it and everything. That's it would be like, why isn't Paul aware of Why isn't Paul aware of, Austrian economics? I don't understand why he doesn't understand about this stuff.
Exactly.
Well, it wasn't even around as a concept. So, so it comes to, how do we take it? I guess, how do we choose which issues?
Yeah.
Like, let's take it even a more difficult one. All right. And we'll be, I'm not a hardball kind of guy, so it's all good. But I'm just thinking, like, say something like pedophilia, right? We would kind of universally condemn that, right? Because, and what would we say? It causes harm. It causes harm to all involved, right? We would say it causes harm, right? So I'm not even sure if this is a good comparison. But I'm like looking and I'm thinking, okay, the idea is, what kind of things are core? What kind of things are we going to take over? Like, because we know that, because we know that this is important and this is core to the gospel, or this is core to the religious belief of scriptures, because otherwise we're just reinventing a religion in our image every generation. And it feels like that doesn't have consistency at its core. So I'm wondering, what do you think about? Maybe you handle in the book, maybe you don't. But even just what do you think about that?
No, I do, and it's why I went sort of almost looking for an ethic. So there's a few things in what you just said I'd love to pick up. I mean, pedophilia is a fascinating example because in our culture it is widely condemned, right? I don't think anyone would want to put their hand up and try and make a defense. No. But actually, at the time the New Testament is written,
it was not, right?
It's not, right? So that's one of those cultural things that's actually flipped. A lot like things like slavery, right? I mean, the Bible...
Yeah, totally.
In some places, it condemns the enslavement of God's people, the Hebrews, but it also totally accepts that people have slaves in other places. So that's a massive cultural shift. And I think when we read the Bible instinctively, we read something like slavery and we go, oh, well, that's a cultural thing. In the same way we read polygamy as a cultural thing. There's very few Christians who would try and make an argument that we should therefore all live that way. So there's some things we understand quite intuitively, reflect an ancient culture, and we as a society have learnt that's not perhaps the best way for people to behave or whatever. But to go to the deeper question I think you've touched on is this thing about what's cultural, right? Because the criticism that I hear when I talk with more conservative friends is, well, you've just sold out to culture, right? This is
Sure, totally.
This is being worldly in some way. You've given up the Bible and you've gone worldly.
Yeah.
So I want to put that in a bigger context, and I do this in the book with these buzzwords, these infallible, inerrant kind of these. Which for people who don't know what they mean, listening, inerrant is this idea that the Bible is without error, and infallible is this idea that the Bible is incapable of error, right? Because it's from God, so it's got a divine source, therefore it cannot be. Now, these are fairly new doctrines of Scripture. And in fact, when we trace the history, we can trace it to the 19th and 20th century, particularly in America, as a direct reaction to the rise of science and things like evolutionary theory and changing society around gender and the rise of feminism. So in reaction to a shifting culture where the authority of the Bible was seen to be diminished, a whole bunch of biblical scholars and church leaders went, we need to start talking about the Bible as this absolute authority, and the way to do that is to say it has no error in it, it's incapable of error, it therefore trumps science or any other insight. The fascinating thing then is that a kind of a fundamentalist or very conservative reading of Scripture is itself a cultural reaction that I would say is antithetical to the Bible. So Jesus is not a fundamentalist. Jesus plays pretty loose and fast with the Old Testament laws, You know, you can read like the Sermon on the Mount in Matthew 5-ish, I think. And he'll say, well, you've heard it said this, but I tell you this. And he's engaged in interpreting the scriptures all the time. He gets critiqued for, you know, not paying attention to Sabbath laws. And he says, well, what's more important, the Sabbath law or healing this person?
Right.
And underneath all of that, when you sort of examine, and scholars better than I have done this with Jesus' teaching of the law, the kind of consistent ethic again of Jesus is he puts people first. It's people before law. It's mercy. It's compassion. Yes. So again, there we have a kind of ethic to say, well, we might have a law that says this back in Leviticus that calls something an abomination. But actually Jesus would say mercy and compassion and people first. And himself felt free to be pretty flexible, I would say. Dynamic.
And so the implication being that if we are Christians are following this Savior that was fairly radical in his interpretations, then why wouldn't we be? And I remember when I was in a seminary at a place, I won't name it, but I was in seminary. It was a very liberal seminary. I had come from a very conservative seminary. And conservative, right, meaning inerrancy, all that stuff.
All those words,
We're not really going there. Like in my New Testament, I don't even know if we read the New Testament. We read all the other Gospels of like Thomas and all that.
Oh, wow. It
was this whole thing. So it was strange. At the one seminary I went to, you had to like take a test before every Bible class to make sure that you were up on your Greek and Hebrew. And then in the other seminary, you didn't even have to take Greek or Hebrew. So it was just a different, it was a totally different focus. It was a totally different focus. So, but the whole point was that I'm trying to get at was that in the seminary that I was at, I had feminist professors, and it was my first time that I'd ever had that, and it was a very challenging time. One of them, we became good friends during the semester, and it was awesome, and she was very patient and good, and the other one was not. So we were not as much friends. She did not have as much patience with my maleness and whiteness and all that kind of stuff. Yeah. So, and this was like a while ago. So when I remember when that happened, and I was like, and the professor, one of my professors, my New Testament professor, made a comment that, well, if Paul say something like, there's neither male nor female, neither slave nor free, right? If you would break down rich nor poor, right, he would break down these very set in stone social categories and demarcation lines. Then why wouldn't we do that today? And I remember thinking, but wasn't Paul pretty stringent about other stuff? Wasn't he? Didn't he condemn like homosexuality or homosexual acts? Right, that's really important. Or whatever it is, and now here we are years later. And again, my whole point was just to connect this. Like, how do we? So, would you think that, like Paul's statement that he made in Galatians, is that as radical as something like, I think that we should be LGBTQIA affirming as a church?
Yeah, so I think.
Do you understand that what I'm trying to get to in the question? I'm not trying to be cute or I don't know. It's like, how do we even really deal with these things? Because Paul was clearly being very radical, and yet I have a hard time imagining Paul would say, throw caution to the wind. We don't care about what the Bible says anymore. When he says, like, these things happen for our instruction, be warned because of what happened, and to the Israelites. Anyway, I'm rambling.
No. It's a great question, because the temptation, and look, in the book, I I'm at risk of offending everyone because I'm pretty critical
That's
of
all of us right now. Yeah, it feels very
true.
strange.
That's the world.
But I appreciate what you're saying, though. It's true.
I mean, so I'm critical of the kind of fundamentalist move towards, I just say these inerrancy and infallibility have become these lines in the sand that if you can't sign
that
on,
should not happen.
Yeah, right. So that I don't think that's how we're supposed to operate as Christians and having to sign on to very particular faith statements. But equally, I'm critical of the very progressive end of the church, which I spend a lot of time in now. But it doesn't actually take the Bible seriously enough at times.
Right.
And so when I encounter these people who've left conservative Christianity and are asking the kind of questions you're giving voice to, the how do we read this? They get told, well, just don't worry about it. And I'm saying, well, just don't worry about it is not an answer. Like if you have some understanding of the authority of Scripture, we have to worry about it. But we also can't pick and choose. So it would be lovely to say when Paul in Galatians 3 says, there's no male or female, there's no Jew or Gentile, there's no slave or free, that's absolutely literal and he meant that. And then we ignore other bits of Paul. But if we read that literally, we've got to read everything else literally, right? Like we've got to try and be consistent. And I think one way to do that is look at the argument he's making. So he's kind of dismantling the division that's been set up, particularly around circumcision between the Jew and Gentile. And there have been scholars who've used that as an analogy for the line in the sand that's been drawn in Christian churches around sexuality. And saying,
I can totally see that.
Yeah, right? Because it's a similar move. I mean, Paul would have just shocked other Jews with this teaching. This was absolutely core to being Jewish.
I mean, and Jesus got himself killed.
Yeah, right?
Right? I mean, they killed him because they didn't like what he was saying.
Yeah, that's right. So, there are analogies there we can draw for, again, a kind of like, when do we need to break down the barriers for the sake of maybe some greater good? I also think Paul, this is where I talk in the book a little bit about the difficulties of translation and interpretation. Some of those words, as you well know, when Paul lists all the sins and all the things that will stop one getting into the kingdom, we literally don't know what some of those words mean. And they're not the same. Some of them
he makes up. It seems he basically creates a word.
Yes, he creates words. So I talk about that. He's put two words together, and we can kind of guess it means something to do with men having sex with other men, but we don't really know exactly what he had in mind.
Right. There's nuance there that could be we're missing and we're not seeing.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
And if you compare, and I do this in the book in one example, you can compare about 8 different English translations, and there'll be 8 different English words for that Paul word, the arsenokoitos word he makes up. And they can vary from men who have sex with other men to pedophiles to, abusers of children. And these are very different things.
Yeah, they're categorically different from consensual to forced to so what do we do? Yeah,
so what do we do? So the other thing I talk about a lot in the book is reading and interpreting with a certain humility and curiosity. Humility because you don't have to go far back in history to find Christians who used the Bible and they probably thought they were being absolutely faithful and doing the right thing by God, but history has told us they're on the wrong side of history. They used the Bible to defend slavery. They used the Bible to defend apartheid. They used the Bible to defend, oppressing women or whatever it is.
Any number of things.
Any number of things. We can go through.
Just list the horrible things. I'm probably sure just about as horrible of stuff you could ever imagine. The Bible's being used.
Yeah, exactly. It's
pretty crazy.
So let's have a little bit of humility. And this is what I see so missing from our conversations in church about these hot button issues. People are just categorically, I'm like, we need to have humility that we too might be wrong. We might be on the wrong side of this, right? And we need to have curiosity to kind of come to the Bible, not to look for confirmation for what we already believe, but curious about what's going on here. Why might this be in here? What can this teach us? You know, why there's crazy stories in the Bible, right? There's rape and murder, and why are these things left in there? They're
why
awful.
do we let children read them?
I know. Oh, that's a whole other topic.
Funny. It's funny because I remember when I was at, one of those conservative, crazy Christian camps, I probably would have shown up on one of these, documentaries nowadays.
Yes. Yeah.
And they would have gone back and I can't believe what they're doing to these kids. I'd be like, I don't know. I had fun. It was cool. But anyway.
But
same. In that, I remember I was reading a, Song of Solomon. And someone was like, they told the camp counselor, hey, he's not allowed to read Song of Solomon. Yeah. He's too young. And I'm like, it's the Bible. What do you mean? And then now I'm like, yeah, dude, I don't want my kids reading half this stuff.
No.
I'll give them nightmares because, now I say that tongue in cheek, sort of, but sort of. I mean,
but
it's
some
pretty,
of it's adult
brutal
content.
Stuff.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. I always thought, why don't we make more movies about David? These would be rated R. You couldn't take your kids to them. That'd be crazy. No. But anyway,
there's a lot of violence and there's a lot of. I mean, and again, this is the other thing. I think depending what you expect the Bible to be, if you come to the Bible assuming that because it's in the Bible it's good or it's God telling you to do something, you're going to have a problem when you run into some of those sections, right?
See, that's, and yes, you anticipated my question. Go ahead.
Yeah. Well, so just because it's in the Bible does not mean it's good, right? And just because something is being described in the Bible does not mean it's normative for all time, right? The Bible is often describing things, including some awful things. Sometimes it leaves it a bit open for us to imply this is terrible. Sometimes it's explicit.
A lot of times it doesn't even make judgments, right? You're just supposed to get from the clues and make a assessment based on what you already know.
Exactly.
And whether this is good or not.
Exactly right. Yeah. So we've got to be able to separate what is describing something in the Bible and what is prescriptive or expected, the bits of the Bible that are actually kind of timeless truths where we want to hold on to those.
So how do we do that, say, with a story like, if we're approaching a story like, say, Sodom and Gomorrah, right? And God is raining down sulfur from heaven. Mm-hmm. How do we take that story and say, okay, and just walk me through this, literally, if you're going to this story and you're in Sunday school, and I guess let's not make it Sally because you would probably, let's make it, what's a good teenage name right now in Australia?
Oh, I don't know. Chloe. Let's pick a girl's name. I don't know.
Robyn. Let's go.
Robyn.
Did you say Robyn?
We can go with my name. I said we can go with Robyn. Yeah.
Sorry, you went out. It
dropped out.
It dropped out, so I didn't hear.
Oh, okay.
So Claire, is that what you said, Claire?
Yeah, Claire. Let's go with Claire.
Okay, Claire. So let's go with Claire. All right, so you're like, hey, Claire's 15. She's reading this, and she's like, I'm feeling like some, I feel like I'm a little confused about my own sexuality. I don't know, I'm attracted to boys, but then I still feel attracted to girls sometimes. And she's reading this thing
in Sodom and Gomorrah. Yeah.
In Sodom and Gomorrah. And God's raining down sulfur on this place. And the preacher last Sunday told her it was because they were gay. So that's why God destroyed it. So how do you come to this now? And she's already been given an interpretation.
Yeah.
And that's the original one, right? That's the one she's heard. It's the first, and maybe maybe makes her feel bad. It's the one she thinks should be right.
Sticks in her head.
What do you do? How do you help her navigate it?
So the first thing I do, or I would try and do, is what I call clear the clutter. So the clutter being the interpretations we've inherited. And to go back, and I mean, I try and do this in the classes I teach in seminary, and it's actually really hard it's almost easier for recent converts than it is for people who've grown up in the church. Because people who've grown up in the church have layers and layers of Sorry, my golden retriever has decided to come join the party, if you can see.
Hey, all right, I got a golden. They can join.
They're awesome.
Oh,
yeah. So you've got to clear the clutter, which is the layers of interpretation that other people have given a story, and go back to the Bible and say, what is actually going on in this story? And if we go back to the Sodom and Gomorrah story, we see there's these two. I mean, it's a weird story, right? It's not something that would happen today, because the two visitors are angels. It's a very weird story. Right? They're not normal people. They're described as angels. So they're like God's agents of some kind. Mm-hmm. And the men of the town basically come out and say, we want to rape them. I mean, now if they're angels, they're actually almost genderless. But we've assumed they're men, and we've assumed this is a problem because they're men, right?
You're right.
But when Jude talks about this, the word Jude uses in the letter to Jude in the New Testament, talks about basically sex with others, someone who is other. So the issue is that humans are wanting to have sex with angels, not that humans are wanting to have sex with same-sex people. So that's one of the dynamics. And then the other dynamic is, I mean, the horrific part of the story to me is that the trade given is have my daughters. I mean, like, what kind of father behaves like that? But anyway.
Oh, that's absolutely horrifying.
So we've got to practice some curiosity, like what is going on in that culture?
Why would he say that?
Yeah. Why would a dad say that? And it's because the rules of hospitality at the time are such that it would be deeply offensive. If someone's taken into your home, you protect them. I mean, it also tells us something around the way that men's lives were perhaps valued more than women's lives, and angelic visitors, if they were acknowledged to be angels, well, then they have a higher status or something. Like, there's something going on there, but we've got to ask a whole lot of questions about what's really going on.
It's just not simply saying, oh, God condemned that because they're homosexual.
No, that's not. In
because
fact,
Sodom and Gomorrah isn't true.
No.
And how could they have an entire? I guarantee there wouldn't be an entire town of just homosexual men in the ancient world, would there?
No, and even if they were in any kind of orientation sense, which the Bible doesn't really talk about, they're going around.
It's not talking about that. Yeah,
they're going around gang raping people. I mean, like that's
horrible.
That's the scenario being imagined. So. Yes. In no world of any kind of consensual sexual ethic is that practiced.
Right.
So we've got to clear the clutter and go, what's actually going on? Why would the dad behave this way? Why would the townspeople want to do this to someone? We've just got to ask a whole bunch of questions. And I think when we do, we see this is not a story about homosexuality at all. This is a story about complete violence and depravity towards strangers that have come into the town, where that's how you want to treat someone who's different or visiting or vulnerable or other. I think it takes on a whole different dimension, and that God harshly condemns, right? That's what God condemns, that you would treat a stranger like that.
Right. And I guess my question, so a couple things came out. One, I love what you just said. Ask a lot of questions. And I think that is a key thing that anybody can do. Yeah. Doesn't matter if you've ever read the Bible. It doesn't matter if you've ever read an article about the Bible. It doesn't even matter if you know what the Bible is or not. If you read a story and just start asking a lot of questions, that will lead you to more critically think about it. Right?
Definitely. Yep.
I mean, just asking questions is one of the key things we can do. Would you agree? I mean, what do you think about that?
I totally agree. I think that's the practicing curiosity. Just be curious about everything. Ask the why. Why are these people doing this? Why might this story be here? Why?
Yeah, who are these people? Why are they saying this? What's going on here?
What do these words mean?
Yeah, because it doesn't even seem like it's not even really a story about Sodom and Gomorrah. I mean, it is.
No.
It is. It's there, but who's the main? Lot is the main character.
Yeah.
Right? Lot's daughter is the main character.
Yeah.
They're not main, but I mean, Lot is the protagonist, right? He's the one that's it's following him, and the angels come, but they come to visit him, right? Yeah. They come to check out, right? To see I'm sending my angels, right? Because obviously, again, another thing, right? Context.
Yes,
Someone
context.
can go read that, but forget to read 18 and 17 and see, wait, this is about Abraham. This is about God's promises to Abraham. This is not about God's angry at this group of homosexuals and wants to torch them because he wants to show the church forever that his attitudes towards
Yeah, I mean, the story is just not about that, right? But we've made it about that.
Right.
In
I
a
can't
way.
hear you. Sorry,
Oh,
one
sorry.
second. Let's see here.
Do you need me to turn up my mic?
I don't know.
I hope it's not my connection.
I muted my mic. I'm unmuted. Maybe it's on my. Oh, now I hear you.
Okay, cool.
Okay, cool.
Yep. No, I was just agreeing with you. I mean, the story. I would say that the Sodom and Gomorrah story is not about, in its original setting, is not about sexuality at all. It's about violence. It's about the mistreatment of vulnerable traveling people. It's just about this group of like just such wickedness, and it's setting up Lot, right? It's also about Lot, as you said. This is the key character that we learn more about. But of course, in the tradition, the clutter we've got to clear is sodomite became the word for a gay man, right? So
in a very negative word, right?
In a very negative way, yeah. And that's still around. So that's part of the, one of the issues we face today, or one of the difficulties, is we have 2,000 years of biblical interpretation between us and the text. And some of that is wonderful, but some of it is really not. And we've got to kind of like get that out of the way. We've got to bust some myths and correct some wrongs and try and get back to the text.
Totally. And it's like, and one of the weird things, right, is there's a lot of interpretations of which that we're affected by, of which we have no idea that it's been interpreted like that, or that we've been affected by that because of the line, right? Because one interpretation then starts to affect, and then someone reacts against that, but it's really because, like, you have to understand what they're reacting against to even understand what they're trying to do. Yes. And so there's so much ignorance of the Bible in general. And that's what makes it so, it's not as, I don't know, I just self-corrected because I was going to say something and then I was like, very quickly, no, I don't think that's correct. But I guess what I'm trying to say is that, the Bible is, there's so much there that we can be unaware of that we bring to the Bible, I guess that's what I'm trying to say.
Yes. So I think, so you talked before about ask lots of questions, and I 100% agree with that. We need to ask questions of the text. But the other thing we need to do is, I think, ask questions of ourselves when we come to the text.
That's what I was going to say next.
There you go.
You're just reading my mind. It's awesome.
We need to be examining what we're expecting, what we're bringing to the text. Are we genuinely coming open-minded or open-hearted, or are we coming to just have some idea confirmed? I mean, when there's a scholar I really like, she's American, Amy Jill Levine, who's works predominantly on the New Testament, but she talks somewhere about these difficult stories in the Bible, and I don't think she was talking about Sodom and Gomorrah, but I would apply it to a story like that invite us to think about who we would be in the story, right? They invite self-reflection. So we can read, we might go, well, that's ridiculous. I'd never behave like that. But in smaller ways, when have we wanted to do violence to someone who's a stranger who's come into our space? When have we been inhospitable? When have we protected someone we think is important and been prepared to throw someone else totally under the bus, like Lot does with his daughters? There's lots of questions we could ask ourselves that allow us to kind of enter a conversation with the Bible where we're kind of learning with and from it. So it's not that it's far more. One of the ways I like to talk about the Bible is it invites us into a conversation with God and with God's people. And those conversations aren't always easy. Sometimes they're really difficult because we're dealing with difficult texts. But we can kind of think with it. right? And do that self-examination. But that requires a certain amount of honesty and openness to do that kind of biblical reading. Because it's not about saying this text means X. It's about saying, how can I engage with it to be a better human being and to hear what God is saying to me?
Right.
Very different question.
Yeah. Those are very, very different questions. And I completely agree. I think that, so I'm trying to get this, make sure I get this right as I'm processing it. So when, so when the Bible is, someone comes down and they open it up and they're reading it, they're bringing all their different interpretations, right? You said they have to exegete, fancy word, they have to interpret, they have to understand and interpret their own cultural situation.
Yes.
Right? Which is not easy. Identify their own biases that we're bringing to the text, including that we think it's inerrant or we don't.
Yep.
Because that's a bias one way or the other,
that's
is it
right.
not?
Including our theological biases, right?
Yeah, I think it's inerrant, it can't err, or I think it can. Those are two biases that we bring that are going to change the way that we interpret something.
Very much so.
So, I mean, I'm getting at, the point I'm getting at slowly here, and the point that I would want you to respond to, right, is that we're all cultural, and everything in the Bible is cultural, right? You mentioned, that thing's cultural. Some people, they love to say, well, everything is cultural.
Everything's cultural.
There's nothing that was brought to us in the Bible, including what we think the most obvious things, that were brought in their cultural right, milieu, and so we can't assume that can we come to any text of the Bible and just assume we understand what it means?
I don't think so. I mean,
at a face value. Some stuff, right? I guess you could probably say God. I think you could come to say, for God so loved the world that he sent his only son.
Yeah.
Okay, I think you can look at that and say, God loves me, and have that probably is part of what the reason that thing was written. But not the only reason, maybe, or maybe not the primary reason.
No,
I don't know.
That's right. Yeah, I think there's lots of, we take these Bible verses. One of my favorites is John 10:10, which, where Jesus is saying, I came that you might have life and have life abundantly. So at one level, that's clear, right? And it's lovely. But we could still ask questions about it, like, what does abundant life look like? Yes. Right? It still invites further reflection. So, yes.
What does eternal life look like?
Yes, exactly. And how does our life model Jesus? There's lots of questions we could keep asking. So, yes, at one level, I don't want to ever say you have to have a theology degree to understand the Bible, or, I think people can pick it up and find meaning and make meaning. But I think we find more meaning if we can enter it with that honest, open curiosity that is asking questions not only of the Bible but of ourselves. And as you said, everything you just said about culture, I'm like, yes, 1,000% agree. Everything is cultural. We can't remove culture. There's no pure reading of the Bible. And the people historically who've claimed there are white men. Right? And what they mean by the pure plain reading of the Bible is their reading of the Bible. Right. And it's why we're learning so much from different voices, coming into the scholarly realm in particular, who go, you've all got a bias here and you've missed this.
Yes.
Because of who you are and where you are culturally.
Yeah, that's so good. That's so good. And people, when you have power, you have the, I don't know if you want to call, I guess advantage would be what I would say. You have the advantage to influence how things are written, how they're interpreted. You have, winners write history books kind of things.
Yes.
And so we have to try to read between the lines or try to figure things out. It's the ancient kings that would never write about a defeat. So you have to like like the pharaohs that you'd have to imply a defeat because they keep advancing from spots closer to their to where they came from. So they're retreating, but they'll never say they're retreating.
No, you got to read between the lines. Yeah,
you fought again at a different place, and so there's so much of that stuff that's just happening all the time.
Yes,
it's happening all the time, and you know what would you want? Kind of for the last 10 minutes, what would you want, like, for, let's say, what would you want, let's go into a couple different categories. What would you want a conservative Christian, a fundamentalist Christian, what do you want them to get from your book? And then we'll move on to a liberal Christian, and then we'll move on to non-Christians.
Ooh,
because we have all that in this.
In your listeners, okay. So to the really conservative Christian, I guess it's the first part of the book that might hit hardest for them, which is where I'm really deconstructing things and saying, I would want them to just hear that the Bible is not this beamed down thing that speaks with one voice. It's actually something that requires us to kind of engage with in a more open way. As soon as you read the Bible in English, you're already reading someone's translation, which is somebody's interpretation, right? So we can't ever not interpret. So I think to the conservative Christian, I would want them to just re-examine some of the stuff they've been taught about whether inerrancy and infallibility and those other words are actually really biblical principles, because I argue they're not. The Bible doesn't use these words to describe itself, and it doesn't behave in those kinds of ways. So that's
great. Yeah, that's a conservative Christian. So you would want them, let me just make sure, let me repeat it so I make sure that I'm saying what you said.
Yeah.
Or you meant to say.
Hopefully.
So a conservative Christian, I'll put myself in that camp. I'm a pretty conservative Christian for sure. And I would say that I would believe in inerrancy and infallibility, although I don't hold on to those as, like, I don't have to have that in order to be Christian, to find fulfillment, to read the Bible productively. Like, I've let go of that, which I'm glad, because in the past, I felt like if I didn't feel like it was everything, like if I didn't feel like it was inerrant, I was sinning, essentially. Like
because that's what we've been taught, right? Yeah, we've been taught that.
Of course.
Yeah.
So what I would do then, so what you're saying is that inerrancy and infallibility, we can't just assume that those are biblical concepts.
No, they're later Christian concepts as a way of making sense of the Bible. But
they're
I don't
later
think
Christian concepts.
Yeah, they're not inherent to the Bible. Yeah.
Right. So the question is then, if you're looking, it's not going to be as simple like, oh yeah, here's the Bible's inerrant. You're going to have to go into a deeper, a deeper analysis of the Bible, and not just assume, especially if we want to reach people that don't, or if we want to be able to influence and interact and talk and be mutually transformed and challenged by people that don't believe that. Because when we approach it with the inerrancy, then we can come at it with an arrogance that can, I think, turn people off.
I think so. And I think, if I can add one other thing, I think there's a real danger, and I'm not saying everyone conservative does this, but it does happen where when the Bible is held up as inerrant, it becomes almost flattened with God. So in some circles, the Bible itself, or a certain interpretation of the Bible, has become God, right?
It's like an idol, which is weird.
And it becomes an idol, yes, exactly. So people say, do you believe the Bible? And I will say, well, I believe what the Bible points to, but I don't believe in the Bible as an object of worship. Like, it's not a thing in itself, except that it's a gift of God to help us point to God. Right.
That's good. That's really good.
So, that's part of that equation.
What would you say to your liberal Christian friends, your progressive Christian friends that only go to affirming churches, and if they see a white Jesus, they'll never go anywhere close to that place, and they'll
Yep.
Feel like they're these crazy country bumpkins. What would you say to them?
Yeah. Well, I would say to them that, particularly when it comes to the Bible, that simply saying we can ignore the hard bits, we can ignore the bits we don't like, is not the solution you think it is. Like we can't, we all have canons within canons, but just saying like, well, that's old, or that, like, we've got to be more sophisticated than that. And I think on both sides, we've got to be prepared to enter into conversations.
Yes.
Right. So there's as much writing off it. I hear it from both ends of the spectrum. I mean, I've been written off by conservatives for having sold out, and then in some progressive circles, I'm too conservative, which is a funny place to be because,
it's a very funny place to be.
Yeah, but we write each other off, and I think we're all just trying to be Christians, and let's actually talk to each other, which is what I love about your podcast, that it's all about people actually talking across the aisle, right?
Yeah, that's what we're trying to do. I appreciate that. What would you say to a non-Christian, someone who's like, coming into this and they're listening and they're like, man, these Christians are crazy.
These crazy Christians,
with their weird Bible. What would you say to them?
I mean, I would say the Bible, if they were going to pick up a Bible and read it, I think I'd say take it lightly, and I don't mean that to disrespect the Bible, but take it as this is the story of a certain people's experience of God and their particular relationship with God that spans about 1,000 years, right? So think of it as entering that story. Think about, what those people are going through. So more from the human perspective, and that there can be real wisdom and I think life-giving, wisdom in the Bible. And ultimately it's pointing us to God and towards Jesus. So the Bible itself is not the end point. It's who it points to. And I mean, you could say that to all people, not just,
of course, absolutely.
But it's a cultural, it's a cultural book for our time and place, right? Like whatever you think of the Bible, we can't totally ignore it because it's in our wider culture for good and for ill, and gets, hopefully more for good, I guess. Yeah. Is what I would hope.
Hopefully more Christians read the Quran and more Muslims read the Bible.
Exactly. Let's talk to each other. Right? Yeah.
Let's understand, because these things aren't going away, at least not until one of the eschatological or end time visions of one of these religions comes true. It's not going away. So
then we'll find out
we're
who's
going to
right.
have these, and we'll find out who's right one day. But that's really good. That's really good. What kind of final thoughts would you say, like, to general audience? What do you hope that they gain from the book, and then how can they keep following you and keep up with your work?
So if you want to see more of my work, I have a website that's just robynwhitaker.com. So you can find me there. You can find me on Twitter under Robyn J Whitaker. I think my handle is. I should know that.
It's all right.
Yeah. So I write both scholarly stuff, and I've written some popular articles that you can find in those places. And I guess my hope for the book, I mean, ultimately, is that we stop using the Bible to harm and abuse people, and we start using it to fuel love towards people. And I don't mean love in a namby-pamby, liberally kind of let's all just hold hands and skip through fields, but like real hard love that looks at justice and it looks at our systems, and it's prepared to embrace the world. And I think for me, that's following the gospel. So let's use the Bible for love like Jesus loved, and not for harm.
That's so good.
Yeah.
That's so good. Well, thank you, Robyn. It's been such a pleasure to have you on the program with us today.
Thanks, Josh.
Any final words?
No, just thanks for having me, and
Absolutely.
for getting up early and talking to me in the middle of the night. I hope I made sense.
Thanks for staying up into the middle of the night. That's crazy. Is it 12:46 your time?
It is. It's time for bed.
Oh, my word. Yeah, it's time for bed. It's time for bed. Well, I'll let you get on to bed. Well, thanks, guys, for listening and watching. And until then, Keep your conversations elevated and up. And we will see you next time. All right.